The day Marin Lockett shot 3 rattlesnakes with 1 bullet was the same day her own family decided she was too dangerous to keep. The sun hung merciless over Parrish County, baking the red dirt until it cracked like broken promises. Marin wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her gun hand, the Colt .45 still smoking in her grip. At her feet, 3 diamondbacks lay twisted in the dust, their warnings silenced forever. "Lord have mercy," whispered her stepmother Dahlia from the porch, pressing a lace handkerchief to her throat. No lady should handle a weapon with such precision. Precision, as if accuracy were a sin. Marin's father, Sterling Lockett, emerged from the shadow of the ranch house like judgment itself. His weathered face bore the same expression he'd worn when putting down lame horses, a grim necessity tinged with regret. The silver star pinned to his vest caught the afternoon light, a reminder that Sheriff Lockett's word was law in these parts. "Marin," his voice carried the weight of desert stones. "We need to talk." She holstered her weapon with practiced ease, the leather worn smooth by countless draws. At 19, Marin moved like liquid lightning, all fluid grace until the moment she struck. Her raven-black hair, perpetually escaping its pins, caught the wind like a war banner. "The snakes were fixin' to strike the colt," she said, nodding toward the young horse that now grazed peacefully near the water trough. "Couldn't let that happen. It ain't about the snakes." Sterling's boots scraped against the porch boards as he descended the steps. "It's about what folks are saying. About you." Dahlia emerged fully now, her powder blue dress a stark contrast to the harsh landscape. She'd married Sterling 3 years prior, bringing with her delicate sensibilities and an endless supply of disapproval for her stepdaughter's unconventional ways. "The Carson boy came by this morning," Dahlia announced, her voice carrying the particular satisfaction of delivering unwelcome news. "Said you challenged his brother to a shooting contest. In front of half the town. And won," Marin added flatly. "That's precisely the problem." Sterling removed his hat, running calloused fingers through graying hair. "Brody Carson's got a reputation to maintain. His pride's been wounded something fierce. You can almost smell the tension thickening in the air like dust before a storm." Marin had learned long ago that men's pride was a fragile thing, easily bruised and slow to heal. But she'd also learned that backing down only invited more trouble. "Maybe he shouldn't have wagered if he couldn't afford to lose," she said. "Marin Elizabeth Lockett." Dahlia's voice rose an octave. "A lady does not. I ain't never claimed to be a lady." The words came out sharper than Marin intended, but she didn't soften them. "Ladies don't survive out here. They just endure." Sterling stepped closer, and for a moment, she caught a glimpse of the man who'd taught her to shoot, to ride, to read the signs of an approaching twister. Before Dahlia. Before the town started whispering about the sheriff's wild daughter who could outdraw most men and outride the rest. "There's been talk," he said quietly, "about finding you a husband. Someone who can temper your spirit." Temper, as if she were a bucking bronco in need of breaking. "And if I refuse?" The silence stretched between them like a taut rope. In the distance, cattle lowed their evening songs while the wind whispered secrets through the mesquite. Marin had always loved this time of day, when the harsh edges of the world softened into something almost beautiful. "The Prescott family's looking for a governess," Dahlia said with false brightness. "For their children back east. It would be proper work, suitable for a young woman of breeding." Breeding. The word tasted bitter on Marin's tongue, as if she were livestock to be traded rather than a person with her own will and dreams. "You're shipping me off." It wasn't a question. Sterling's shoulders sagged. "We're giving you a chance at a respectable life. Away from this." He gestured vaguely at the vast expanse of Texas stretching toward the horizon. Away from freedom. Away from everything that made her who she was. "When?" she asked. "The stagecoach leaves tomorrow morning," Dahlia said, unable to hide her relief. "Mr. Prescott has already arranged everything. You'll have a fine room, regular meals, and the company of civilized people." Civilized. Another word that stung like a slap. Marin looked out at the land that had raised her, the endless sky that had taught her to dream, the unforgiving earth that had taught her to fight. Tomorrow, she would leave it all behind for a world of parlors and propriety, where women spoke in whispers and never raised their voices above a murmur. But tonight, she was still free, The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through her thoughts. Like a blade, a lone rider crested the hill to the east, his silhouette dark against the burning sky. Even at a distance, she could tell he sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle. Sterling squinted into the dying light. That's Ellis Camden's boy. What's he want? Marin's pulse quickened. She'd heard stories about Camden, the drifter, who'd bought the old Morrison place sight unseen and paid in gold. Some said he was running from the law. Others whispered he was searching for something he'd lost. As the rider drew closer, Marin could make out more details. Broad shoulders, dark hair beneath a well-worn hat, and something in the way he carried himself that spoke of quiet confidence rather than swaggered. He reined in his horse at the edge of their property, close enough to be heard, but far enough to show respect. When he removed his hat, revealing eyes, the color of storm clouds, Marin felt something shift in her chest like tectonic plates finding new alignment. Evening, Sheriff Lockett, the stranger called, his voice carrying easily across the distance. Name's Camden. I'm looking for someone who can handle a gun and ain't afraid of hard work. But what kind of work required both deadly accuracy and fearless courage in a land where secrets ran deeper than prairie wells? Camden's eyes found Marin across the dusty yard, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at her, not with the dismissive glance most men gave unmarriageable women, but with genuine assessment, as if he were measuring her worth by standards she didn't yet understand. I'm afraid my daughter isn't available for employment, Sterling said, his voice carrying the finality of law. She's departing for Boston tomorrow to take a position with a respectable family. Is that so? Camden's attention never wavered from Marin. And what does the lady herself have to say about it? Lady. The word sounded different in his mouth, not mocking like Dahlia's usage, but somehow weighted with respect. Marin stepped forward, ignoring her stepmother's sharp intake of breath. Depends on the work, she said. Camden swung down from his horse with fluid grace, his boots hitting the dirt. With a soft thud, up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of long hours squinting into harsh sun, and a small scar above his left eyebrow that suggested he'd tangled with more than prairie wind. I've got cattle going missing, he said, addressing her directly rather than her father. 20 heads so far, taken clean without a trace. No rustler tracks, no blood, nothing. It's like they vanished into thin air. Cattle don't just disappear, Sterling interjected, but Camden held up a hand. With respect, Sheriff, I've been tracking for nigh on 15 years. I know what rustler sign looks like, and this ain't it. He turned back to Marin. I need someone with keen eyes and a steady hand. Someone who ain't afraid to ride hard country and ask hard questions. Dahlia sputtered. Sir, you cannot possibly be suggesting that a young woman. I'm suggesting that the right person for a job ain't always the one you'd expect. Camden's voice carried steel beneath the velvet. I hear tell Marin Lockett can track a whisper through a thunderstorm and shoot the wings off a fly at 50 paces. Heat rose in Marin's cheeks. Men rarely spoke of her skills with anything approaching admiration. Usually, her abilities were discussed like character flaws, unfortunate defects that made her unsuitable for polite society. The position pays $20 a week, Camden continued, plus room and board. $20. Marin's breath caught. That was more money than most men made in a month. Enough to buy her own horse, her own land, her own freedom. Enough to never depend on anyone else's charity or tolerance again. Absolutely not. Sterling's voice cracked like a whip. My daughter will not be gallivanting across the countryside with a stranger, regardless of the wages. Begging your pardon, Sheriff, but she's of age to make her own choices. Camden's tone remained respectful but firm. Unless there's some law in Parish County against a woman earning honest wages. The challenge hung in the air like smoke. You could feel the tension crackling between the two men, old authority meeting new possibility. Marin watched her father's face cycle through emotions, surprise, anger, and something that might have been grudging respect. You don't know what you're asking, Sterling said finally. Marin's got a wild streak that might be exactly what I need. Camden's storm-gray eyes found hers again. Wild country requires wild solutions. For the first time in her life, Marin felt truly seen. Not as a problem to be solved or a burden to be managed, but as a resource, Valuable precisely because of the qualities that made others uncomfortable. What makes you think I can find your cattle when you can't? She asked, a slow smile spread across Camden's weathered features. Because you think different. Because you see things others miss. He paused, studying her face. Because you ain't trying to prove you belong. You already know you do. The words hit her like a revelation. She did belong here, in this harsh and beautiful land that had shaped her into something stronger than parlor games and tea parties could ever make her. The East might offer safety, but it would cost her soul. I'll need time to consider, she began, but Dahlia cut her off. There's nothing to consider. The arrangements have been made. Her stepmother's voice rose with desperation. The Prescotts are expecting you. Your trunk is already packed. Then perhaps it's time to unpack it, Marin said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the cattle seemed to pause their lowing, as if the entire ranch held its breath. Marin could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears as she stared down the life others had chosen for her. Sterling removed his hat again, running his fingers through his hair, a gesture she recognized from childhood. He always did that when wrestling with decisions that pitted duty against desire. The boys got a point about the money, he said slowly. $20 a week would set you up proper if you were careful with it. Sterling, Dahlia's composure, cracked like drought-parched earth. You cannot seriously be considering what I'm considering, he said with quiet authority. Is that maybe we've been so worried about what folks think, we forgot to ask what Marin wants. Camden stepped closer, close enough that Marin caught the scent of leather and sage that clung to his clothes. I won't lie to you, he said. The work's dangerous. Whatever's taking my cattle ain't natural. And there's folks in these parts who don't take kindly to questions. What kind of folks? She asked, his jaw tightened. The kind that built their fortunes on other people's misfortunes. The kind that don't like strangers poking around their business. He met her eyes. The kind that might try to scare you off if they think you're getting too close to something they want kept buried. Buried. The words sent a chill down Marin's spine despite the evening heat. But alongside the fear came something else, excitement. The thrill of a challenge worthy of her skills. When would I start? She asked. Tomorrow dawn, if you're willing. Tomorrow. The same day she was supposed to board the stagecoach to Boston in a life of quiet desperation. The same day she was supposed to become someone she'd never recognize in the mirror. I'll need to think on it, she said, though her heart had already decided. Camden nodded and swung back into his saddle. I'll be at the old Morrison place if you change your mind. But don't take too long deciding. His eyes swept the horizon, where the first stars were beginning to pierce the darkening sky. Something tells me we're running out of time. But as Camden rode away into the gathering dusk, none of them noticed the figure watching from the ridge, or the glint of metal. Catching the last light of day, Marin rose before dawn, her decision crystallized like frost on winter grass. The house slept around her as she moved through familiar rooms, gathering the few possessions that mattered, her mother's silver locket, her worn leather gloves, and the small derringer her father had given her on her 16th birthday. Floorboards knew her footsteps well enough to remain silent as she crept toward the kitchen. But Sterling sat waiting at the scarred oak table, 2 cups of coffee steaming in the pre-dawn darkness. Figured you might need fortification for the road ahead, he said without looking up. Marin settled into the chair across from him, wrapping her fingers around the warm ceramic. The coffee was black as midnight and twice as strong, the way her father had always made it during calving season when sleep was a luxury they couldn't afford. You ain't trying to change my mind? She asked. Sterling's weathered hands cradled his cup like a prayer. Been thinking all night about what kind of father sends his daughter into danger. He finally met her eyes. Then I remembered what kind of daughter I raised. The words hit her harder than any blessing could have. This man had taught her to shoot straight, think quick, and never back down from what was right. Now he was trusting her to use everything he'd given her. There's something about Camden that don't sit easy, he continued. Man's got secrets written all over him. But his eyes. Sterling paused, searching for words. His eyes ain't the eyes of someone who'd hurt an innocent. Marin sipped her coffee, tasting the bitterness of chicory and the sweetness of trust. What about Dahlia? Your stepmother means well, but she's never understood that some flowers bloom best in rocky soil. Sterling reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You've got your mother's spirit, Marin. wild and beautiful and strong enough to bend without breaking. They sat in comfortable silence as the eastern sky began to blush pink. Through the window, Marin could see the familiar silhouette of the barn where she'd learned to gentle horses and mend bridles. Soon, all of this would be memory. If things go sideways, Sterling said quietly, you come home. Pride ain't worth dying for. But freedom might be, Marin thought. Instead, she nodded and rose to leave. The ride to Camden's place took her through country she'd known since childhood, but everything looked different in the morning light. The cottonwoods along Willow Creek seemed taller, their leaves whispering secrets she'd never noticed before. The red rock formations jutted from the earth like ancient monuments to forgotten gods. You can almost taste the change in the air, that electric anticipation that comes before thunderstorms and new beginnings. The Morrison place sat in a valley between two low hills, protected from the worst of the wind, but open enough to see trouble coming from a mile away. Camden had made improvements since buying the property. New fencing, a rebuilt barn, and corrals that spoke of a man who understood horses. She found him working a young stallion in the round pen, his movements patient and sure. The horse was a beauty, coal-black with white markings that looked like they'd been painted by an artist's brush. But there was wildness in the animal's eyes that reminded Marin of herself. That's midnight, Camden called without turning around. Found him, running with mustangs up in the high country, still deciding whether he trusts humans enough to let us help him. Marin dismounted and approached the fence. The stallion's ears pricked forward at her presence, nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. There was intelligence in those dark eyes, and pain. He's been hurt, she observed. Rope burn around his neck. Someone tried to break him the hard way. Camden's voice carried disgust. Some folks think strength means domination. The words held layers of meaning that made Marin's chest tighten. She'd spent her whole life being told that her strength needed breaking, her spirit needed taming. Seeing this magnificent creature, still fighting for his freedom despite past cruelty, gave her hope. You ready to see why I need your help? Camden asked, finally turning to face her. She nodded, and he led her to a map spread across a makeshift table, papers weighted down with stones and marked with careful notations. Red X's dotted the landscape like wounds. These are the spots where cattle disappeared, he explained, his finger tracing the pattern. Always between 10 and 15 head. Always healthy breeding stock. And always on nights when the moon was dark. Marin studied the marks, her mind cataloging distances and terrain. They're taking the best animals. Someone who knows cattle. That's what I figured too. But look at this. Camden pulled out a piece of paper covered in his careful handwriting. I talked to every rancher in 3 counties. None of them are missing stock. Whatever's happening to my cattle, it ain't rustling for resale. A chill ran down Marin's spine. Then what's it for? That's what we need to find out. Camden's gray eyes were grave. Because yesterday, I found something that changes everything. He led her to the barn, where he pulled back a tarp to reveal something that made Marin's blood run cold. Scattered bones, picked clean and gleaming white in the dim light. But these weren't cattle bones. Found them in a cave about 5 miles north, Camden said quietly. Hidden back where the light don't reach. He crouched beside the remains. Look at the cut marks. Marin knelt for a closer examination, her stomach churning. The bones showed signs of careful butchering, precise cuts that spoke of knowledge and purpose. But there was something else, something that made her skin crawl. These cuts, she whispered, they're not for eating. No, they're not. Camden's voice was tight with controlled anger. Someone's been using these animals for something else entirely. Something that requires specific parts, specific preparations. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Ritual slaughter. Dark practices that had no place in civilized country. But who would need cattle bones for such purposes? And why Camden's herd specifically? There's more, he said, producing a small object wrapped in cloth. When he unfolded it, Marin saw a medallion unlike anything she'd ever encountered. Black metal etched with symbols that seemed to writhe in the lamplight. Found this with the bones. Near as I can tell, it ain't from around here. Camden's fingers traced the strange markings. But someone local knows what it means. Someone who's been taking my cattle to feed whatever darkness this represents. Marin forced herself to breathe steadily, to think like the tracker her father had trained her to be. The pattern of the thefts, they're not random. Someone's been watching your herd, learning your routines. Which means they've been watching. Me too. Camden met her eyes. And now they'll be watching you. The weight of what she'd agreed to settled on her shoulders like a lead blanket. This wasn't just about missing cattle or earning wages. This was about confronting something evil that had taken root in her beloved homeland. "We start tonight," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. But neither of them saw the shadow that detached itself from the barn wall and melted into the morning mist, carrying news that would set deadly wheels in motion. The attack came at sunset, when the sky burned red as spilled blood and shadows stretched long across Camden's property. Marin was checking the north fence line when the first shot rang out, a sharp crack that sent birds exploding from the cottonwoods in a flurry of wings and panic. Her horse spooked, but years of training kept her seat as she wheeled toward the sound. Through the gathering dusk, she could see muzzle flashes blooming like deadly flowers near the main house. Camden was pinned down behind the water trough, his rifle barking defiance at unseen attackers. 3 men, maybe 4, positioned to create a killing field with no escape. Marin's blood turned to ice water as she recognized the tactical precision. These weren't desperate cattle thieves. They were hunters who'd come to eliminate witnesses to their dark work. She urged her mount toward higher ground, using the terrain her father had taught her to read like scripture. From the ridge, she could see the full scope of the ambush. 4 men with rifles, spread in a semicircle around the buildings. Professional, patient, deadly, but they hadn't counted on a 5th player entering the game. Marin dismounted and checked her weapons, the Colt .45 at her hip and her father's Winchester in the saddle scabbard, 43 rounds between them. She'd have to make every shot count. The closest attacker crouched behind Camden's new fence, methodically placing shots to keep the cowboy trapped. Marin could see his profile in the dying light, a man with a grizzled beard and eyes like winter stones. The kind of man who killed for money and slept sound at night. She settled the rifle against her shoulder, feeling the familiar kiss of wood against her cheek. The distance was maybe 150 yards, an easy shot in good light, but twilight played tricks with shadows and depth. She'd get one chance before the others marked her position. Her finger found the trigger as naturally as breathing. The world narrowed to the space between heartbeats, between the whisper of wind through grass and the distant cry of a hunting hawk. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and the bearded man toppled backward without a sound. Chaos erupted in the valley below. The remaining attackers swung their weapons toward the ridge, muzzle flashes stabbing through the gathering darkness like angry fireflies. Bullets whined overhead, close enough to part her hair, but Camden was moving now, using their distraction to advance on the second shooter. Marin watched him flow through the landscape like liquid shadow, a man who understood that sometimes survival meant becoming one with the very danger that threatened you. The second attacker never saw him coming. A brief struggle, a muffled cry, then silence. 2 down. 2 to go. Marin was repositioning when she heard it, a sound that turned her spine to ice. The low, rhythmic chanting that seemed to rise from the earth itself carried on wind that suddenly tasted of copper and sulfur. Words in a language that predated churches and civilization, spoken with the authority of ancient power. You can almost smell the wrongness in the air now, that metallic tang that comes before lightning strikes and worlds change forever. The remaining attackers had abandoned their ambush positions and were converging on something behind the barn. Something that pulsed with sickly light and cast shadows that moved independent of their sources. Camden appeared at her side like a ghost, his face grim in the eerie illumination. "We need to stop this," he said. "Now." "Stop what?" But even as she asked, Marin could feel it. A presence pressing against the edges of reality like a tumor seeking entry into healthy flesh. "They're not just thieves," Camden said, his voice tight with knowledge she didn't want to understand. "They're cultists, and they've been using my cattle to feed something that should have stayed buried." The chanting grew louder, and with it came the smell of burning bone and rendering fat. Whatever ritual they were conducting, it was reaching its climax. The very air seemed to thicken, pressing against them like invisible hands. Marin forced herself to think past the supernatural, dread clawing at her mind. How do we stop them? Break the circle. Scatter the bones. Kill the leader before he can complete the summoning. Camden checked his weapons with mechanical precision. Simple in theory, and in practice. His storm gray eyes met hers. In practice, we're probably going to die. The honesty was strangely comforting. At least he wasn't trying to protect her with lies about their chances. Then we better make it count. They moved together through the darkness, two predators stalking prey that had forgotten to watch their backs. The chanting masked their approach, growing in volume and intensity until it seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Behind the barn, they found a sight that would haunt Marin's dreams for years to come. A circle of cattle bones arranged in precise patterns, each piece carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. In the center, a fire that burned without wood, its flames the color of old blood and fresh graves. Two men knelt at opposite sides of the circle, their voices weaving together in harmonies that should not exist. Between them stood a third figure, tall, gaunt, dressed in robes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but the air around him crackled with malevolent energy. The leader, the one who had to die, Camden, raised his rifle, but before he could fire, the hooded figure's head snapped up as if sensing their presence. Eyes like burning coals fixed on their hiding spot, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of ancient darkness. "Come out, little mouse," he called, his words dripping with mockery. "Come see what your interference has cost." The flames in the circle suddenly roared higher, and Marin heard something that made her blood freeze, the terrified lowing of cattle somewhere close by. Live cattle, the next offerings for whatever abomination these madmen were trying to birth into the world. "They've got more animals," she whispered, "and they're going to use them to complete the ritual," Camden replied. "Whether we're here or not." The choice crystallized with brutal clarity. They could retreat, try to get help, and return to find something unspeakable loose in the world. Or they could act now, with insufficient weapons and impossible odds, and try to prevent an atrocity that would stain the land forever. Marin thought of her father's words. Some flowers bloom best in rocky soil. Tonight, she would discover what kind of flower she truly was. "On three," she asked. The Camden's smile was sharp as a blade. "On three." But as they prepared to charge into hell itself, neither saw the fourth cultist circling behind them, or the curved knife gleaming in his hand. Marin's instinct screamed a warning just as the blade whistled through the space where her neck had been. She threw herself sideways, rolling behind a stack of feed sacks as the fourth cultist's curved knife embedded itself in the barn wall with a meaty thunk. Camden spun, his rifle speaking thunder in the confined space. The cultist staggered but didn't fall. Whatever dark power fueled these men, it made them harder to kill than mortal flesh should allow. "The circle," Camden shouted over the renewed chanting. "Break the circle." But the hooded leader had anticipated their move. The flames roared higher, casting dancing shadows that seemed to reach for them with grasping fingers. And from somewhere beyond the fire, that awful lowing grew more desperate. Marin could see them now. A dozen head of Camden's finest cattle pinned just beyond the ritual circle, their eyes rolling white with terror. The final sacrifice to complete. Whatever abomination these madmen sought to unleash, the wounded cultist came at her again, moving with inhuman speed despite the spreading bloodstain on his chest. Marin drew her Colt and put 2 bullets center mass, watching him stumble but not fall. Whatever unholy communion these men had entered, it granted them strength beyond natural limits. But it didn't make them smarter. The cultist raised his knife for another strike. Marin noticed the medallion hanging from his neck, twin to the one Camden had found with the bones. The source of their unnatural resilience. Her third shot took the medallion dead center, shattering the black metal into fragments. The cultist's eyes widened in shock before the accumulated damage finally claimed him, and he crumpled to the earth, like a puppet with severed strings. "The medallions," she called to Camden. "They're protected by the medallions." But Camden was already moving, his rifle trained on the hooded leader. The shot that should have ended the ritual instead sparked off some invisible barrier, the bullet deflecting harmlessly into the night. The leader's laughter was like the sound of breaking glass. "Too late, little wolves. The veil grows thin, and my master stirs. Soon, this world will know the sweet embrace of eternal darkness." The flames in the circle began to pulse with their own heartbeat, and the temperature plummeted despite the hellish fire. Frost formed on the barn walls in intricate patterns that hurt to look at directly. Whatever was trying to claw its way into their reality, it was almost through. Marin's mind raced through possibilities, discarding plans as quickly as she formed them. They couldn't break the magical barrier. They couldn't reach the cattle before the ritual concluded. They couldn't wait. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes the direct path ain't the right path. Sometimes you got to think like water, find the cracks and flow through them. The ritual required precise placement. The bones had to remain in their exact positions for the summoning to work. But what if the ground itself shifted? Marin holstered her weapon and sprinted for the barn, ignoring Camden's shout of alarm. Inside, she found what she'd hoped for, a keg of blasting powder left over from when the previous owner had tried to clear stumps from his fields. The powder was old, maybe unstable, but it would have to do. She hefted the keg and ran back outside, where Camden was keeping the two remaining cultists pinned down with precise rifle fire. "Cover me," she yelled, then sprinted toward the ritual circle. The hooded leader turned his burning gaze on her, and she felt the weight of his attention. Like a physical blow, her steps faltered as alien thoughts pressed against her mind. Visions of a world remade in shadow and suffering, where human will was subordinate to darker hungers. But Marin Lockett had been forged in Texas heat and tempered by frontier hardship. Her will was her own, and she'd be damned before she surrendered it to anyone, mortal or otherwise. She broke through the mental assault and hurled the powder keg into the center of the bone circle. The ceramic vessel shattered against the unholy flames, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then Camden's rifle cracked one final time, and his bullet found the scattered powder. The explosion lit up the night like a newborn star, scattering bones, and cultists alike in a thunderclap that shook the earth. The supernatural flames guttered and died, and with them went the oppressive presence that had been pressing against reality's walls. In the sudden silence that followed, Marin found herself flat on her back, ears ringing and eyes streaming from the acrid smoke. But she was alive. They were alive, and the darkness had been turned back. Camden appeared above her, his face streaked with soot, but his storm-gray eyes bright with something that might have been admiration. "That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen," he said, offering her his hand, "or the most foolhardy." "Maybe both," she admitted, letting him pull her to her feet. Their hands lingered together longer than strictly necessary, and she felt heat that had nothing to do with explosions or supernatural fire. The surviving cattle had broken free in the chaos and were scattered across the valley, but they were safe. The cultists lay still among the scattered bones, their medallions dark and powerless. Whatever threat they'd represented was ended, but as Camden's fingers tightened around hers, Marin realized something else had ended too. Her old life of trying to fit into spaces too small for her spirit. Tonight had shown her what she was truly capable of when she stopped apologizing for her strength. "So," Camden said, his voice rough with emotion and smoke, "still planning to catch that stagecoach to Boston?" Marin looked around at the aftermath of their battle, at the land she'd helped defend, at the man whose steady presence had anchored her through supernatural terror, at the future spread before them like an uncharted map. "I reckon Boston's got enough governesses," she said. "But Texas could use one more woman who ain't afraid to fight for what's right." Camden's smile was warm as summer lightning. "In that case, Miss Lockett, I believe we have more work to do. There's a whole territory out here that could use protecting." As the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky pink and gold, Marin saw something beautiful blooming in the ashes of the night's horror, the promise of partnership, of purpose, of love that didn't require her to be anything less than everything she was, the wild rose. After all, bloomed fiercest in untamed soil. Well, partner, if that tale of courage and true love didn't set your heart racing like a Mustang in a thunderstorm, then you might want to check if you still got one beating in your chest. Give this story a like if you believe love conquers all, and subscribe for more tales from the frontier where hearts run as wild as the wind. Now, drop a comment below and let us know where in this wide world you're watching from today. We love hearing from folks far and wide.